Consumers are being manipulated, defrauded, and injured not just by marginal businesses or fly-by-night businessmen, but by the well-established business firms. Victimhood is the other hand of consumer power. Even free consumers are vulnerable to being defrauded, manipulated, and shortchanged. However, this topic is somewhat controversial. Some people believe that consumers choose to be the victim by not standing up for their rights. There are three situations in today's world that make a victim. The first is not getting the best deal or getting ripped off. The second is thinking that consuming lots of goods will make the consumer happy. And third, government policies not being what's best for the consumer. Now meet Jack. Jack is a young man with a wife and 3 kids. He is trying his best to save money to go back to school, but he falls victim to consumerism so often that it doesn't look like he's getting an education anytime soon.
Number 1.
Consuming any good makes one vulnerable, at risk, a potential victim. Consumers are pleasure seekers. Consumers want to be happy with their purchasing choices. The excitement of the experience of consumer culture counterbalanced by the bitter disappointment from a purchase while failed to live up to expectations. Pre- and post-satisfaction is a huge detriment of consumer self-worth. Self-worth relates to whether a consumer chooses to be a victim or not. Empowerment and self-assertion has close associations with the social construct of consumer as a victim. Empowerment suggests an evolution from whining about failure to knowing how to complain to the pinnacle of a self-assertion. However, people tend to be reluctant to report problems and stand up for themselves because they will have to acknowledge that they made a bad choice, lowering their self-worth.
Not getting the best deal is the point where the consumer chooses whether or not to be a victim. The consumer can be a victim and take the bad deal, being underpowered and unassertive, or they can stand up for themselves and be empowered, assertive, and not a victim. Since brand names add extra value to products and services, and complaints tarnish those brand names, companies are generally encouraged to clarify the information they give to customers. This includes information about guarantees, after-sale services, warranties, response to complaints, and so on. All companies say their goal is to provide satisfactory products, but what does satisfactory actually mean? To the law, satisfactory means free from defects unless the purchaser has been informed, fit for the purpose, and as described. The key issue here is that customers have difficulty defining what is and what is not satisfactory. After all, what's good for one person may not even be close to what another person was expecting to get. Now, let's find out a little more about Jack's day.
Jack has been having car troubles for the past month. He drives a 1987 Honda Accord that he bought from his dad, and seeing as how Jack is on a tight budget, he decides to go to the cheapest, greasiest mechanic in town. This mechanic is known for his poor workmanship and overpriced services, but Jack figures he has no choice and decides to take the old Accord into the shop. The mechanic tells him he's better off just getting a new car, but Jack loves his Honda, so he tells the mechanic to fix it. Jack has just been ripped off in 2 ways. First of all, he paid significantly more for the repairs than he should have, and secondly, the repairs were done mostly with duct tape and paper clips.
Number 2.
Before World War II, the common worker began to feel alienated by capitalism. This got people thinking, and they became solely preoccupied with consumption. They thought this would make them more connected to the world. After World War II, the idea lost some merit, and the world started to celebrate consumption as an active pursuit rather than a passive escapist activity.
We have entered a new age of global consumer capitalism. Today, when people see a fancy car or a mansion of a house decked out to the nines, their eyes light up and smiles come to their faces. Consumers link the idea of certain goods to be a certain lifestyle and are often taken advantage of because of those links. Consumers think that by wanting these goods and then by having them, their life is improved. Every time consumers place their hopes for a better future in a certain product or service, they become a victim. People become slaves to their goods, even more by ensuring that they get the best deal. By taking part in the very act of trying to improve our lives through consumption, we submit ourselves to the forces that alienate us from our peers. So how was Jack affected by consumerism?
1 week after getting his car from the mechanic, Jack's car breaks down in the middle of the highway. Luckily or unluckily, he is right in front of a Cadillac dealership when his car stops running. Jack believes in the saying, "Chrome gets you home," and ends up buying a brand new Escalade, which is way out of his budget. Jack figures this will only be a one-time expense that will solve all his problems, so he doesn't think it over too much or consult his wife.
Number 3.
Consumers today rely on the government for protection, but protection from what? Criminals? Terrorists? Gangs? The guy in the suit trying to sell you soap? Not exactly the first thing that comes to mind. Governments set up policies and procedures designed to keep consumers safe from the big bad corporations. However, rigid standards can be bad for business when they are imposed from the outside and to an unrealistic degree. Therefore, protection is limited from the start. Even when policies are put in place, consumers are unpredictable. It is difficult to make a law that covers every possible situation a consumer can get themselves into. For example, whether people complain and how they complain is not easily predicted. In the United States, complaints tend to come from people in higher socioeconomic classes, and people in that group vary on how they will react. They can be passive, irate voices, or activists. Unfortunately, if the government does need to intervene, it is usually done after a scandal or something drastic has happened. The mass media thrives on stories, which usually leads to public outrage and government involvement to keep some semblance of peace and then a change of laws and cultural acceptance.
The two big questions when it comes to the law are, is it possible for consumers to be victims, even if the traders stay within the limits of the law? Yes. Like I said, consumers are unpredictable. Can any law by itself offer adequate protection to consumers? No, at least not on its own. In developed countries, protection relies on a combination of government influence and competition in the market. The market, sooner or later, will eliminate inferior, uncompetitive, or inefficient traders. The effectiveness of any law depends crucially on consumers' knowledge of it and their capacity to resort to agencies with the ability to do something about it. Consumers are often ignorant of their rights and just write off their losses. The success of policies depends on interest groups and how well organized they are. They are only effective if practiced collectively by a broad group. Once again, people are reluctant to report if something is wrong, and legislation doesn't matter if people choose to be a victim. The function of the law is to lay out framework of rules, obligations, and rights. They do this well, but unless consumers know their rights and are prepared to fight for them, the law by itself can do little to stop consumers from being a victim. So how did the law affect Jack's day?
Jack wakes up one day to a knocking at his front door. He walks downstairs and opens the door to two police officers that are there to repossess his Cadillac because they found out it was stolen. The dealership only got away with selling the vehicle because they played on a bunch of technicalities that slipped through the loose government regulations.
In marketing terms, the idea of being a victim does not exist. The marketing tasks plot the predictability of the unpredictable consumers I discussed earlier. Their goal is to think of the rules of how to handle situations that might seem random. To a marketer, there are just pre- and post-purchase satisfaction and dissatisfaction ratings. A marketer's job is to manage those ratings. In turn, they become skewed to the satisfaction side.
Today's consumers believe that the highest value a person can receive is the right to be an individual, and it seems that the only way to not be a victim is to be part of a group and cooperate with other consumers. So, as long as this mentality persists, consumers will continue to be vulnerable in the marketplace.